Hello world! Welcome to this video on how to configure a development environment for pandas. Um, One of the biggest barriers to new contributors, especially if you're not coming from any other projects, is getting that first environment set up. And I think a lot of developers that have done it for a while take for granted how difficult it was when they first started. So this video is to help you get over that initial wall and get you through with an environment that you can use to develop pandas and of course almost any Python project. Um, so we'll start here. I have the pandas documentation open. I'm just going to go right to the development section and I'm going to jump to contributing to pandas. Now there's a lot more here that you should read through, but for the purpose of this video, we're just going to walk down to working with the code section, and they give you some links about Git, which is a really important tool. But again, just for this video, we're going to power through and just jump right down to forking. Okay, so the point of this is to get your own copy of the pandas repository in your GitHub account that you can push branches to and own yourself, and that's just kind of the whole process of how GitHub works. So to show you that visually, what you'd want to do to start here is find the pandas page on GitHub, and there's this nice little fork button in the top right-hand corner. You could simply click on that and make sure it's pointed to your user account or wherever you want it to go. You may be in a couple different groups, but you can toggle that with the owner drop down here, and then basically just create the fork, and GitHub will take care of the rest for you. Now I'm going to skip that because I have an existing fork already. I've done this before, but you'll see once you go through that forking process, you'll have your username and you'll have a pandas environment in here. So that is step one. And now that we have everything set up on GitHub, we want to jump to actually setting things up locally on your computer so you can develop. So to do that, you should open your terminal application. I'm running Linux, but if you're running Mac OS, you should have a similar terminal application, and Windows has PowerShell. A bunch of other options out there, so if you're not sure, just pick the one that comes with your system. And you want to make some kind of directory on your computer where you could store this data. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the this code button here and just hit copy. This will give me a link that I can copy using Git, or clone using Git to get all of the artifacts down on my computer. And navigate to wherever you want to put this repository on your computer. I have a folder called clones that I put almost everything into. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and remove a existing pandas installation that I have. And let's make this a little bit bigger. And right, so I'm starting from scratch here. And again, I was here, I hit the clone button. So I could just say git clone since I have Git installed. And you'll see that this will pull down the pandas repository for me and all the objects. So we're just going to wait for that to complete. And very good. We will see that the command finished. I have a pandas directory now that I can cd into. These commands should work on PowerShell as well. And ls to list all the files, and you'll see that matches exactly what you have up on your fork. Okay, so we don't need to go too deep into Git, but the way that most pandas development is set up is you're going to have two remote repositories that you pull from. One is the origin, which was just now created by default. So I will do git remote-v show, and you could see that I have something called origin that points to this git at github.com will aid pandas git. That was exactly what I pulled from here. Now, you also want to add the actual pandas repository. And to do that, you can come in here. Same thing, hit the clone button and just copy this. So we're going to say something git remote add, and we're going to name this upstream and just paste that URL that we had. And now if I do a git remote vshow, you'll see that I have origin and upstream. So this is important because you're going to push things basically to your copy, to origin, but you're going to pull updates from upstream, the main pandas repository, as they happen. And that's how you synchronize the changes between the two environments. So one last thing that's important, and if you're just starting out with Git and aren't super familiar with it, Git branch will tell you where you are. We want to make sure that we are basically up to date with the upstream branch. Again, we're always pulling from upstream. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that command, and that makes sure that I have the latest and greatest updates from pandas. And I can see that if you do a git log, it'll bring up all the commit IDs showing you when they happened. So we could see November 30th, and you also see my system date is November 30th as well. So I am up to date with the latest and greatest pandas on GitHub. So if you go back to the documentation, you want to click on this creating a development environment link. And at this point, we've basically set up our local code. Make sure you have that done. You have all the latest changes from upstream on your main branch. And if that's the case, we're ready to set up the actual development environment. We have two options here in the documentation, using Docker and without Docker. So if you're familiar with Docker, definitely a great thing to use. We'll talk about option 2 after going through option 1, because I think most people use option 1, and specifically option 1A with Mamba. We're not going to go over 1B. It's a little bit more complicated, so let's try to keep things nice and easy this first go round. Now, the one downside to not using Docker is there are still some things that vary by platform that you need to worry about. We have instructions for Windows. If you're on Windows, you need to add the build tools for Visual Studio 2019. There's a nice little command here you should be able to copy and paste. And yeah, make sure that's set up. If you're on Mac OS, you need to get Xcode installed using xcode-select --install, this command here. Accept any license agreements, go ahead and continue, and make sure you do that first. Now, if you're on Linux like I am, and you've gotten to this point and you plan to use Mamba, you're actually good to go. So we can go ahead and skip forward to the Mamba usage. Now, first thing, of course, is to make sure you have Mamba installed. If you don't have installed, you can click through the links, and it'll take you to download pages. Right, so make sure you get the right download for your platform. And then when you have that set up, and you're back in your terminal in the pandas repository, we can actually start to move forward with that environment. So you see here the first command is mamba env create. So I could run that. I'm also just going to add a -f, which explicitly says grab the environment create commands essentially from environment.yaml. Now, if you were to open up your code on your computer, you could see this environment.yaml file. It's going to create a conda environment called pandas dev, pulling only from conda forage with all these dependencies, right? So without getting into the details of that, you could just let that command run, and it could take a few minutes. So we're going to go ahead and skip forward, but be patient with as installs. It doesn't happen immediately. Okay, so hopefully that worked. If it did not, a couple things you might want to try. Make sure that you delete anything that might be hanging around. So you can do mamba env remove name pandas dev. I'm not going to run this because mine installed correctly. But maybe deleting the environment if it got stuck in an intermediary state and starting over could help. As a nuclear option, there is mamba clean all. Hopefully you don't need to get through or try either of those, but a couple things to try and just hit the reset button if things go awry. But fortunately for us, that didn't happen here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say conda activate pandas dev. Now this basically brings us into the environment that we need with everything set up. So you can go ahead and run Python within this environment and try to import pandas since we're in the pandas directory. Now you'll get, the first time you do this, an error that says something like this: module not found, no module name, pandas dot underscore libs. So what this is basically telling you, and without getting too deep into how pandas is structured, pandas is of course a Python project, but it also has some files written in C, C++, and stuff written in Python that gets basically, generates C and C++ files. So unlike Python, those files actually need to be compiled and generated before we can do anything. So this is the last command that you'll see in the documentation here, which is around setup.py build ext, meaning build those extensions. So you can go ahead and run that, build ext. You could say in place for now. And the one last thing that you'll likely want to use is -j, and you could provide some kind of number here. Typically, the number of cores that are on your machine will work. Now, if you're having trouble with that, you can keep reducing that. But yeah, that -j will give you some level of parallelization. So we're going to go ahead and let that run because this also can take a couple minutes, and see what things look like at the end. So we are back. Looks like things ran. We didn't get any errors during this phase. If you do get errors during this phase, it's likely a bug of some type that needs to be addressed. So you can certainly open a issue with that on the pandas GitHub. But for now, we can go ahead and jump back into Python. And I'm just going to go ahead and try to import pandas. And now, no error message. Everything works correctly. You could do everything you want with your pandas objects, inspect them, and you're working with the latest development branch. So cool, that was the Mamba solution. Let's go ahead and switch over to trying that with Docker. Okay, so the first step with Docker is obviously to make sure that you have Docker installed. And once you have that done, we could just jump right in. Now, if you're not familiar with Docker and you're just starting out, you can basically think of Docker as creating like really small virtual environments for you, relative to kind of the old methodology, which was to have like a whole virtual machine, right? So with Docker, you can create this small environment that has everything installed on it that you need, that runs essentially the operating system you need, right? So you could act like you're running a different operating system with all these things pre-configured. So it's nice for, trying to smooth over issues where, and we saw this in option 1 of Mamba, where, different platforms had different steps they need to go through. Docker abstracts all that for you kind of nicely. So the way this works is, we have a Docker file in the pandas repository. So you'll see that in the root of the project. You can feel free to look at that if you want. But step 1 is, of course, to build that into an image, right? So you could do Docker build, and then you could do -t, which means tag this as something. Now, in the documentation, we have it tagged as pandas, your name, env, whatever you want to call it is fine, right? So I'm just going to call mine pandas docker dev. And the dot means look in the current directory for a Docker file, and go ahead and build that. So this could take a little bit of time. Let's just go ahead and wait for this, and I'll skip forward in the video. All right, so it took a little bit of time, but we could see here that I have a new image built that I tagged pandas docker dev. So you could see this if you just run docker image list. You'll see 2 different images now. Now, one is the base image, that was pulled from Mamba Forge, and the second one is the image that we just created called pandas docker dev. Okay, and you see some instructions here as well for what to do once you actually jump there. Now, one of the advantages of this Docker image is that it already built everything for us. Might have taken a little bit more time. But yeah, it as part of its setup instructions, at least in this version of pandas, you could see that it had a command to run and set everything up. Now, as you make changes going forward, you might want to work with that a little bit more interactively without having to rebuild the image. So what you could do from there, and as you make subsequent changes in the future, is actually run that image as a container, right? And you see some of the instructions here. Let's go step by step, though, to see how this works. So first of all, we do want to run docker run, so I'm going to type that here, and I'm going to say --rm, which means basically when I'm done running the image as a container, you can delete it, save some disk space, don't keep it dangling around. In this case, you could pretty much just always do run --rm. I want to give it another flag for -it that helps me work with it interactively. And then beyond that, what I also want to do is, go ahead and mount the current directory. So that's what the -v volume does. Now, depending on your platform, the instructions might be a little bit different, but I think this $ curly brace pwd means take the current directory, and then I provide a colon, and I'm going to push that to /home/pandas within the container. And then what I'm also going to do is say I want to set my working directory within the container to /home/pandas. And then finally, I'm going to say which container I want to run, and that is pandas docker dev. So this will bring me right into this image in some place called /home pandas dev. Now, you'll notice here that it has the base environment for Conda activated, or Mamba activated. You probably want to, once you're running this, start with the activate pandas dev. Let's try Conda activate pandas dev, and that worked. And then, yeah, now you could do all the normal commands that you would want to do, like that build command. We can go ahead and run this, but it's already done for us here. So you can see that it pretty much returned really quickly. So you can run Python in your container like you would normally, and yeah, everything's built and taken care of for you. So that is the Docker approach. Again, if you aren't familiar with Docker, I would suggest going with the Mamba approach. But if you are familiar with Docker and know how it works, this image will kind of set everything up for you, so you don't have to mess around with Mamba and other tools, at least when you're starting to learn things. So I will jump out of that Docker container, and we're done. We have a working development environment. So let's talk about what to do when things go awry. And a lot of times this happens because obviously our build tooling evolves over time. We add dependencies, kind of drop some dependencies. And as things change upstream, if you have a build tool chain that's kind of incompatible with whatever the latest files in the repository require, you're going to run into some issues. So we see this all the time, like if you try to run the extensions and you get some error about a missing library or something else that doesn't make sense, I really strongly suggest just like starting over from the tip of the main branch and making sure that you can get that to compile. So a couple things here. If you're starting out, I would look at your Git status and see where things are. And so I'm on main, and then what I want to do is make sure that I have the updates from pandas upstream, so I will go ahead and grab those. So we're good to go. If you're running this at a later date, you probably will get updates to come down, but for now I'm up to date, so nothing more needs to be done there. Once you have that set up and you're on main and are updated, if you have issues with the Python code, I would start by cleaning everything. This will basically remove all of the extensions that pandas compiles, right? Those C files and things that Python creates. So that starts you over with that. If you're using Mamba or Conda, the first thing I would suggest is making sure that you update your current environment. So this will check for any kind of missing dependencies, anything new that's in environment.yaml. Do this while you have the pandas dev environment active. So we'll let that run. Could take a little bit of time. Let's jump forward. And great, you could see that I'm all up to date now. So continue along from there with your typical setup.py, build.ext, whatever, and go ahead with that. If you're still having trouble with that, something you could do is deactivate the environment. You can remove the environment, mamba env remove -name pandas dev, and that'll completely wipe the environment for you. After which you could start over with your mamba env create -from environment.yaml and recreate all the steps you saw earlier in this video. If you need to, there's kind of the nuclear option, the mamba clean, all that'll get rid of all your package caches and everything. I'm not sure when you would need to do that, but if you really get stuck, you could always try those things. If you went the Docker approach and you're having issues, rebuild the image, right? So you could just do a docker build -t and then whatever the name was, I kind of forget, so let me look at my image list again. Docker image list. So here we would do something like docker build -t pandas docker dev no cache and that'll take care of it. Or you could RMI to remove the image would be another option as well to start over. Now I'm not going to do that here. I have these set up, but again, just some things that you could try to go through and make sure you get everything set up optimally. If you still are having issues, you're really getting stuck, if you check out the pandas repository and you go to the README, there should be a Slack channel that you can go to. So let me search for Slack, and here we go. So hop into that Slack channel. A lot of the maintainers and developers are there, and I guarantee you will find the help that you need. So with that said, thanks everybody for watching this video, and have fun coding.